is up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to another episode of Bleeding BnG. Before I get too deep into this episode, guys, you already know what I'm going to say. Be sure to comment, be sure to like, be sure to subscribe because I got a lot of content coming because football season is here and week one of the preseason is on the horizon. So I had to bring in personally one of my favorite media personalities to cover the Washington Commanders, and he should be yours as well. My guy, Lake Lewis Jr. How you doing today, Lake?
What's up, Jay? How you doing, man?
I'm doing good. I saw you at training camp last week, and I hadn't seen you for a minute. I got a little excited. I was like, "There go my man Blake, boots on the ground, like good old times." So yeah, I just wanted to check in on the Commanders, because like I said, football season is in the air. Are you starting to feel it?
Yeah, man. I mean, it's been warming up at camp as far as the practices, as far as the tempers flaring. Nothing bad, but just it's ramped up considerably since day one, and I think aid with that heat, it had guys kind of in their feelings a little bit sometimes.
Oh wow, I hadn't heard about any training camp fisticuffs being thrown, so you might be getting some inside scoop that we hadn't necessarily heard of. But since I did mention that you have been boots on the ground, let's start with the biggest main attraction coming out of Ashburn, and that is what is going on with Andrew Wiley.
Man, I try not to get in trouble with saying stuff, but I mean, Jay, I've been saying for a long time, man, that I just don't know if he's your right tackle. I just don't. I think because Brandon Coleman looks to me like he's going to be the opening day starter at left tackle, I think that Cornelius Lucas should be your right tackle. I truly feel like that. So, I mean, if that's what you're asking me, and that I don't know. I mean, he's had moments where he's played well, but
Mhm.
then you see why he struggles at times, and I just think you could have a better fit with Cornelius at that spot.
No, the reason that I asked you that is because the practice that I was actually out there was the first one where it wasn't a normal practice for him. And he hasn't had a normal practice since. Like, he's been sitting out, he's been on field goal block teams. But I'm going to leave that alone because I was obviously trolling. Let's get to the real main attraction coming out of Ashburn. And today is it's August 7th, Wednesday, August the 7th. And our guy Jaden Daniels was actually named QB1 or unofficially named QB1 going into preseason week one. My question for you is, did he earn it? Was this a competition as it was made up to be, or was all of that a facade in the first place?
I mean, he's earned it because he's looked like the best guy. I mean, they do something different with this with Dan Quinn's group, Cliff Kingsbury, Tavita. Everything they do is different from previous regimes, and all four quarterbacks, ironically, Jeff Driscoll as well. Marcus Mariota. They all get reps. And when I say that, I may not starting reps, but they all do their drills together. They're all throwing the ball at the same time. They're going through the same footwork drills at the same time. So everyone's getting a chance to do the same exact thing. But you could clearly see from day one. I mean, Jay, look, I said this before. You could be, a child of Stevie Wonder and Ray Charles, and you still were going to see that Jaden Daniels was the best, not just the best quarterback on the field, but probably one of the best talents, period, on the field. And I think that he's earned it. I think when Dan Quinn wanted him to earn it, I don't necessarily believe it was more, his play because everyone knew that he was going to be the better quarterback. But I think he wanted him to earn the trust and the
Mhm.
camaraderie of his teammates. And he's clearly done that. I mean, he tells guys where they need to be on the field. He talks all the time. He and Zach Ertz have a really nice bond already that's going to pay big dividends for him during the season. So to answer your question, I do think it was a fair, open competition, but it was done after the first practice.
I love to hear that, and it just goes along with the line of thinking that I've had regarding this situation. Because I think Dan Quinn is a football naturalist, right? So he just wanted to go through that hierarchy of the
Yep.
quarterback position, and we're here now. And you were one of the guys that were more positive on Jaden early in the draft circles and the pre-draft circles. So, is there anything that he's showing you now, like that he's live in the flesh that you didn't necessarily see? or didn't notice pre-draft, or something that you didn't necessarily see on film at LSU?
I mean, that's a great question. What I was looking for in particular was I wanted to see his leadership qualities because, when you're an alpha athlete in college, you can get away with a lot of things just being better than people. And he had great receivers at LSU. Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas. I mean, they're first round receivers.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted to see, how does he take over a huddle? How does he perform to the point where his teammates galvanize around him? And I've seen it from day one. I mean, I saw it in rookie minicamp before the veterans were even there. He just had a different air about him, and it wasn't arrogance, it wasn't cockiness. It was just more of an assuredness that I know I'm talented enough to be here. And now that he's, learned the playbook and found his way. I mean, if you're a Commanders fan, man, this to me, and I'm saying this, and Robert was my dude.
Absolutely.
There's no comparisons in talent. I mean, there's
Oh,
just
wow.
this. Jaden Daniels is a real pocket passing quarterback who just happens to have some dynamic wheels. And guess what? They haven't even unveiled his wheels yet. I mean, I think I've seen in every practice, maybe I don't think he's ran the ball more than 10 times all training camp, literally. I could go back and say when Robert was in training camp, he probably passed the ball 10 times in training camp. You know what I mean? So this is a guy that gets it. He sees the field. He's quick with his decision making. I mean, the ball's out of his hands in 2 seconds. Not to get long winded, but I talked to Brandon Coleman about that and how as an offensive lineman do you have to block for a guy that can take off at the same time. He mentioned that Max Dugan was at TCU with him, so he's familiar with that. He said, but with Jaden, he's so quick with his decision making. Like he said, you might look up, and he said, I might have to give an extra 3 yards because he might already be gone. So these are the little things that I think fans should be super excited about.
Man, like you know how I get, man. I'm about ready to run through a wall. But let's go on the opposite end of the spectrum. With Jaden Daniels being very much on the radar as a presumed to be franchise quarterback. Who are some under the radar guys that have stood out to you that could be battling for that back half of the final 53 man roster come the first cut down day in September?
I mean, there's a lot of talent on this team, and we talk about it every day in practice. Our good friend Felix Trammell. He and I were talking about, and David Harrison from Sports Illustrated. We were talking about how, what are they going to do with Amani Rogers? And obviously yesterday they cut him, so they released him. So these are the things that you're going to start seeing. Some names that in years past probably would have been contending to be a starter. Well, now those guys aren't good enough to make the roster. And I don't want to use the word good enough, but just getting caught up in numbers games. But that's always the sign of something good brewing because the better teams in the NFL have to make those hard decisions because they have hard decisions to make. Washington hasn't had hard decisions over the past few years. They had a couple frontline stars, and then everything after that was Glade trash bags. So now they're in a position where they can make these kind of decisions. So I'm going to throw a name out at you that he's having a really good camp. Bryson Tremaine, wide receiver from Stanford. He's 6'4", 6'5", been making catches all over the field. The question is he really good enough, which I think he is, but does he make the roster? Because I think they're going to keep 6 receivers if they decide, to stretch it out a little bit, because I think Jamison Crowder is one of those 6 regardless. But if they decide, look, Jamison, is our special teams guy too, but we want to have another receiver, then I think Bryson Tremaine is the guy that they'll take. But I also think Tinsley, from Penn State, you already know. I think he has a chance to make the roster. I mean, they have a lot of tough decisions to make. I think at the safety position, what are you going to do? I mean, you have obviously Chen makes the roster. He's probably going to be your starter. Quan Martin will be a starter back there. But then you have a young guy like Percy Butler, who a lot of people like, in the building. So you think of him. You think of the kid Hampton that they drafted from Washington. I mean, normally coaches like to keep their guys. You know that, Jay. You know that's who they pick. That's who they scouted. And that's who they want to develop. So you have to think of all these players that are going to be back there. So It's hard to answer that question, man, because I could go on and on for days. Offensive line, defensive line. I think a guy like Fedarian Mathis might be on the hot seat, literally. So hopefully I answered that question for you.
Oh no, you more than answered it because it goes along with it validates my thinking. Because in my last episode, I mentioned how this was the hardest year I've ever had since doing this show, where I had to project the final 53. But that just
Mhm.
shows what competition does for the back half of the roster, right? Because it
Yep.
clouds what your perception of everybody that's going to make the roster. Because we, like you said, there's been guys that'll be third stringers on another team that have been penciled in as starting defensive linemen and things of that nature. And just to go along the lines of, not to touch with the previous era too much, because I'm trying to get so far removed from that. But what is the biggest difference that you notice between a Ron Rivera training camp and a Dan Quinn training camp? Because I'll give you mine after you say yours.
Man, it's quite obvious. It's the efficiency of it.
Mhm.
These guys come out on the field and they have a purpose, they have a plan in place, and there's no everything is fast. Like they practice fast, they're playing fast, they're getting in and out of their breaks fast, they're getting to their next position group fast. I mean, everything is like in a hurry, and the practices are almost 45 minutes shorter than Ron Rivera's practices. And the thinking behind that is get everything you can get done in an hour, 25 minutes, and then let guys have mental time too. Obviously, let guys rest their bodies as well, especially in these dog days. It's hot outside. So now all of this stuff is efficient. You can tell they use a lot of analytics. They're using a lot of data. They're doing everything to basically, Jay, they look like a modern professional outfit.
Mhm.
And it's the first time. I mean, Shanahan had a nice setup when he was running practices, but his practices were too long and they were at 3 o'clock. They were in freaking the hottest part of the day. So
Mhm.
guys were mentally not there. So I just love what I'm seeing with Dan Quinn. And then the other thing that I have noticed too that's equally important, every coach, every position coach is literally coaching their guys, not yelling at them, not demeaning them, but coaching them. And I mean to the point where they're coaching with their hands, they're doing everything. And it's a lot of love being given, a lot of encouragement, a lot of that's what I'm talking about. So it's more positive than negative. And you can just feel the vibe. Guys look like they're out there having fun at practice when in the years past, it looked like they wanted to get the hell out of there.
You beat me to it, late, because that was going to be my point. Is that they're coaching with intent, and
Yes.
when I was around the general access, Sunday when I was out there, we were packed in by like sardines. But I was trying to make my way around the different position groups, and every single one that I saw, there was a coach making a different coaching point. Like you said, they were hands on. Sharif Floyd seems like he's super excited to be a coach. I love that he's injecting that youth into that coaching room and things like that. And even like last year, I was even out there more so than I was this year. And Ryan Kerrigan seems like a complete 180. He was not this excited coaching those
He
guys.
looks like a coach, right?
Yeah, he was not. That's what last year guys were standing around, and I don't want to say that there weren't any coaches that didn't coach with intent because Coach Randy Jordan did, but like the DB room, it was no surprise to me why they performed like they did last year. If you saw how they did in training camp, they were running drills that I was running in ninth grade, and to hear that their
Well,
coach
that's that
came
was
out of high school.
because that's because they had a high school coach.
Yeah, and it made a lot of sense. That didn't come out until the middle of the season. But
Exactly.
once I started to hear that, I was like, and that's what those training camp practices started to look like. So while training camp, the beginning of training camp is starting to end, week one of the NFL preseason is on the horizon. And just looking
Mhm.
at the commander's scope of things, who do you think needs a big preseason to kind of secure their spot on the roster? Like you said, these are a lot of guys that came from the old regime, or we had a lot of roster turnover. So there aren't a lot of guys. If you look at the first unofficial depth chart, there's 8 projected starters from the 22 starters that we had in 2023. So that's a huge turnover. So is there any guy that has been on the roster for a while that you think needs a huge preseason to kind of solidify his role on this team?
Yeah, there's two, and they're on both on defense. I mentioned Fedarian Mathis. That's one.
Mhm.
And surprisingly, I think Jamin Davis has to show something. It's not because he's not a good talent, a good football player, but it's because he gets no reps with the linebackers, so he's specifically being coached as an edge rusher, on the defensive line, and they've got a lot of them already, guys, Dante Fowler, Dorrance Armstrong, Cleveland Farrell. I mean, they have guys that know what they're doing at that spot. So it's going to be kind of hard for Jamin to crack that. I truly believe that. And so the question is an experiment to see if he can do that, and then they can work him back in with the linebackers? I don't think so. So I think he's got to show that he's picked up the knowledge of being coached on that D line, with Daryl Tapp and some of these guys and Kerrigan, because if not, he could be a numbers game. And you know how this goes. He wasn't one of their guys. They inherited him. And when you see a guy like Jordan McGee from Temple, who I'm telling you right now will be the third linebacker to go along with Bobby Wagner and Frankie Louvu. I mean, I'm so excited about those three of those guys. I think that linebacker room with Pittman and these guys, it's about to get ugly. So I don't know where Jamin would fit back in there. I don't think he does. So I think he's got to show that he can get around that edge and get some pressure on some quarterbacks in this preseason, or you might be hearing his name, as a potential trade bait guy. Or in the NFL, you don't really do a lot of trades, so he might be out.
What's next? All right, let me bounce this one name off of you, and I promise you, I'm not trying to hot take Blake, but this is one of the guys that came with the new regime. But I think a guy like Luke McCaffrey needs a big preseason. And let me tell you why. Because I put it out there on my last episode on my podcast that I think that Luke McCaffrey is a guy that, and I don't think that he's in danger of making a roster or anything. We spent high draft capital on him. But I do think that he's a guy that can potentially start early in the season on the inactive roster come game day. And with you saying that it looks like Jamison Crowder is like a shoe-in at the punt returner, that even more solidifies my belief, because he hasn't necessarily stood out in the 2 days that I've been out there. And, he hasn't really, I haven't seen you or any other beat reporter mention how he's been making any splash plays. So what you think about that name?
I like him a lot, actually. I mean, I do. And he does make some plays. It's just times when his number's called or whatever. I think the onus has been to try to work the edges a little bit, because that was something that this team lacked, was that explosive play. So they know what they can get underneath. And Jaden, surprisingly, everyone said that he couldn't throw the ball underneath because he didn't have to at LSU. So that's why he wasn't doing it. But he